And I'm joined now by the Shadow Work and Pensions Secretary, Owen Smith. He's in our Westminster studio. Welcome to the programme, Owen. We've had plenty of evidence from the pollsters. You saw and heard some of it there in our focus group, that at the last election, Labour wasn't trusted on the economy, particularly when it came to managing the welfare bill. Do you think you're on your way to earning that trust?
Well, I think if you take the evidence of the poll that matters, if you like, the poll with the people, and you look at Oldham last week, then maybe we are starting to win back that trust. There's no doubt that we didn't have it at the last election. That's why Labour lost, and lost badly. But we did win a good victory on Thursday in Oldham, up 10%, the Tories down 10%, and therefore perhaps we're in the foothills of starting to win back trust. But I recognise, Jeremy recognises, we've got a long way to go. We've got almost 5 years until the next election, and we will need to put in place the policies and the ideas to win that trust back fully. Right.
You talk about Oldham and the victory for Labour, which it was, but that's a Labour heartland. You shouldn't be surprised that you did well somewhere like Oldham. One could say that's despite the policies of the National Party. It was because of the very strong local candidate. That's not a Nuneaton that you need to win back, is it?
No, it is a Labour heartland, but we were talking in the media, for example. We heard lots of suggestions that Labour was going to lose that seat, or if we'd win, we'd only win by 1,000
Labour
or two.
MPs were saying that, Owen Smith, actually.
Well, that's my point. But I think the psephologists, the pollsters, were certainly saying that in their view we were likely to really struggle. So for us to hold it as well as we did, increase our share of the vote from last time round, 11,000 majority, you can't say anything other than it was a good victory for Labour. And I think it has to be a vindication both of Jim McMahon, our excellent candidate, now the MP for Oldham, good local guy who's been a council leader, very well respected, the sort of rooted community-based politicians we produce in Labour and that we need, but also a vindication of Jeremy Corbyn and perhaps the rebuilding of trust, because no one in Oldham can have been under any doubts as to who the leader of the Labour Party is right now.
All right, well,
everybody knows that.
Let's talk about welfare then in relation to that, because we heard in that focus group the lady saying Labour was just giving benefits left, right and centre and leaving the country in so much debt. How do you address that?
Well, I think we've got to start by doing what we didn't do well enough under the last Parliament, which is call out the lie from the Tory party that the debts this country were in and are still in. Let's not forget that the Tories have practically doubled debt.
Let's talk about welfare specifically, though, Smith, because after the election, the Labour Party under Harriet Harman clearly felt it should move closer to the Conservatives on welfare, not further away. The party didn't vote against their bill introducing £12 billion of savings. Harriet Harman herself said she was sympathetic to lowering the benefits cap from 26,000 to 23,000 in London. You didn't vote against a limit on child tax credits for 2 children. Were you and she wrong?
Yes, in that vote we definitely were wrong, and that's why Labour has now voted against the welfare bill. And the reason for that is the reason many people in this country, I think, have started to turn against the Conservative Party, because the tax credit changes that were at the heart of that bill and the heart of the £12 billion savings.
But you knew about the tax credits. You knew about the tax credits bill. Then you still were in favour of a benefit cap. You were still at the time in favour, in Harriet's words, of lowering that benefit cap, and you wanted to limit it to child tax credits to 2 children. So was that all a complete aberration?
Well, as I said, I think those were the wrong decisions. I argued actually within the Shadow Cabinet at the time against our abstaining on that vote. I said in my conference speech just a couple of months ago that this is no time for the Labour Party to be abstaining on whether we make poor people, working people, poorer in this country. People want the Labour Party to stand up.
Well, hang on, you say
people.
What's your evidence for saying that people want you to do that? Because actually Harriet Harman on this show announced that Labour didn't oppose limiting child tax credit to 2 children because she said we simply cannot say to the public that you were wrong at the election. So, again, who's representing the people here?
Well, we might point to Heidi Allen, who we've got on the programme, I think, later on, or any of the other 20 or 30 or so Tory MPs who stood up against their own Prime Minister just a few weeks ago
on tax credits,
saying that they got it wrong on tax credits.
Right, but let's have a look.
Taking money away. Well, the Tories describe that as welfare spending. That was part of their £12 billion pounds at the election. So it's entirely legitimate, Joe, for me to talk about that. That's what we were opposing.
Of course it is, but it's not just that. We are talking about, you said, people want us to do this, and I'm trying to get from you the evidence for that. Yes, on tax credits, but more broadly on Labour's, or the perception of people on Labour with welfare. Because we've seen leaks from polling for Labour's Learning the Lessons Task Force, chaired by Margaret Beckett, in which people said Labour was in thrall to the undeserving, needs to be for middle-class voters, not just down and outs. And a Labour win would have been good for people on benefit and immigrants, anyone claiming money. How will you win an election if people only see you as representing those groups?
Well, we've got to win an election because those groups and low and middle income earners in Britain, the very people being hit by the tax credit cuts and now the universal credit cuts that are coming on stream next year, need a Labour government in order to introduce fairness. But they also want to know that we are in favour of reform. There's no doubt about that.
Right. But where's the evidence? Where's the evidence for that? Because if you look at your own, this is your own focus groups, this is your own polling, and it is not in line with what the public want or the way they view you.
Well, that's what I just said, Joe. In addition to supporting in-work benefits for people who are in low and middle-income jobs, like tax credits and universal credit, we also need to be making an argument for reform of the wider system.
And do you accept you're not doing that?
Well, I think we're only just starting to do that. I'm going to be announcing in the new year a big new commission by the Labour Party to look at social security, to try and present a Labour alternative or a reformed social security system. There's no doubt that for generations people have increasingly become mistrustful of the social security system. People think it unfair, people think it inefficient under Labour and Tory.
Right.
And we need to win back people's trust in it, because it should be a massive positive for our country that we have a generous welfare state. It's a positive, and we need to fight for that and make the argument.
Which policy decisions so far are going to back up that idea of reform rather than people's idea that you are only for people on benefits if you are trying to broaden your appeal? Well, I mean, you've talked about tax credits, but if you want to lower the benefit cap, if you now don't want to limit tax credit to children, which policy areas now back up what you've just said about reform?
Well, we've said very clearly that we support the government in capping the overall spending on social security. So they've introduced a cap of
and the benefit cap?
116 billion. Well, the benefit cap, interestingly, I think we've reserved judgment on. But it was only 2 weeks ago that we
wasn't
had
your view.
Well, let me finish, Joe, if I may. It was only 2 weeks ago we had a legal opinion from a judge here in London that the benefit cap was discriminating against disabled people. There is further evidence that the benefit cap isn't doing what the government set out to do. It isn't saving money, because it means local councils are having to spend money on discretionary housing payments to support people who are being made homeless as a result of it. It isn't helping people back into work. It's only around 4% of people who seem to be getting any benefit. So the question is, what is this benefit cap for on individual households? Yes, we need, of course, to have a limit on the amount of money that people can have individually and as households, but it has to reflect need.
OK, well, hang on, that's important. That's important because listening to you there, it sounded like you wanted to drop the idea of a benefit cap in principle. So you still support the idea of a benefit cap at £26,000 a year?
No, we don't. We've said already...
You did, though, didn't you, at the election? You did support it.
At the election we did, and since the election we've changed our view. Our view is that cutting it to £23,000 and £20,000, which is what was included in the welfare bill. I'm afraid this stuff's very complicated in lots of numbers, but we've got to get into these numbers. That would mean that it would affect literally millions of people across Britain. It would have resulted in increased hardship.
What should the cap be, then?
And would have cost money. Well, I think we need to get back to a principle that people used to understand, which is the connection between the sorts of support you might receive from the state, the amount of money you contribute, so getting back a connection between contribution and reward, but also your need. So if you've got 3 children, or if you fall pregnant in a period when you lose your job, you don't get penalised for having that third child. It seems to me extraordinary.
So you aren't
that the government could be
you're not
penalising
supporting
children.
a cap at all at the moment. You can't give me a figure. You can't say that the 26,000 was right. You're now reviewing the whole policy. You agree with Jeremy Corbyn, it resulted in social cleansing?
Joe, I've been saying that for the last 2 months. There's nothing new there. We said at the election that we said shortly after the election that we were going to oppose the reduction.
But that's not true, Owen Smith. When I spoke to you last time on the Daily Politics, you said to me it was you were going to stick to the principle of a benefit cap.
No, I didn't, Joe.
You did.
No, I
you
didn't.
said in September that you wanted to have a benefit cap. In principle, you didn't agree with lowering it to 23,000,
no,
and that Jeremy Corbyn was against it.
What I said very clearly, we were opposed to the reduction to £23,000 and £20,000 outside London. I said also that we were reviewing the concept of a benefit cap across the board, but that we do accept that there have to be limits on the amount of money that an individual household can get in benefits. And what we need to do is get to a point where we've got a much fairer set of criteria to analyse and understand why we should be giving family X amount Y. And that should reflect their need, the number of children they've got, the nature of the work they're in, the relative security of that family. Fundamental principles we've always adhered to, but the Tories are breaking. I think most viewers out there will not understand a government that says we penalise children and we take money away from them on the basis of how many children they have.
Although you abstained,
it's just not
you
fair
did
or
abstain
right.
on that issue earlier, but yes, you've changed your mind.
And I've voted against it since.
And you've changed your mind. In terms of the shadow cabinet colleagues, should colleagues of yours be worried about being sacked after voting against the leadership on airstrikes?
No, I don't think they should be. I mean, obviously, I'm not in charge of reshuffles. That's a job for Jeremy, but I think this is just newspaper tittle-tattle, Joe. What I've seen of the way in which Jeremy's handled this in shadow cabinet is that he's been very keen to stress that we've got to be respectful of the different views. I voted against, others voted in favour. I don't think there is any reason, and I think any abuse that anybody has been subject to as a result of decisions taken in good conscience and good faith is disgraceful, and we should not settle for it or allow it in the Labour Party.
Owen Smith, thank you.